So we talked about a single global network map. There's also a single common set of network parameters. So these are typically network parameters that are of a technical nature, things like the minimum version, the event horizon, the maximum size of messages, and things of that sort. So in themselves, the majority of those parameters are not of particular interest except in extreme situations. However, there are some key parameters like the list of valid notaries in the compatibility zone that are clearly pretty fundamental. There are some core implications of this. First of all, the finding of other nodes. It means that if I can find a node on the network map, then they can guarantee to be able to find you. So it's a two-way, symmetric way of finding people. And secondly, if I've got a collection of transactions that I consider valid based on the rules of that particular compatibility zone, then I should be able to guarantee that any other party in that compatibility zone will also conclude the same thing about the validity of those transactions, and that's a critical core aspect of the way this works. So, I'll get this to down. Okay. However, those set of requirements that we set as the sort of the original vision principles don't always meet everybody else's requirements. So we have the concept of business network operators, and some BNOs have got concerns about privacy, particularly in the early days around the membership of their business network. So if you're one of the very first business network operators on the network and all your members are published on the network map, then that means that other people can infer who belongs to what business network. So if that is something that needs to be kept completely private, that's potentially a privacy issue around membership. The other thing is that we have one common set of notaries and the notary whitelist. It may be the business network operator wishes to manage the risk in a different way by having their own set of notaries and preventing other users from accessing those notaries. So, for example, if you have particular service levels associated with your notary, yet those were open to everybody, that's potentially a risk in terms of you managing your service. So those are a couple of areas. So the obvious answer is, well, why don't we let people have private networks so they can have their own set of parameters, their own notaries, their own completely private environment? Yes, they can. However, the implication is that in the long run, if you want the users of those private networks to be able to interoperate with us in other networks, then we have an issue about how that can be achieved. So, why that's difficult is obviously interoperability, e.g. by merging networks so that you can find the other parties and so on, is a difficult thing. We've done quite a lot of work on this, and there are definitely serious issues around this, primarily around the trust boundaries and so on that you have. So you've obviously got different trust routes managing two different networks, so they have to agree to trust each other at a comparable level for you to have a reasonable chance of being able to merge them. They've got different technical parameters, and they use different notaries. So just as an example of why this might be a problem, a zone operator should in principle refuse to accept notaries from another zone if those notaries actually have been operated at a slightly different level of integrity. So they should not want to water down and reduce the overall guarantees that they deliver from their network. So you get a little bit of issue around ensuring that everybody is happy that all notaries are trustworthy. So we've come up with the concept of segregated subzones. This is, we think, an opportunity to at least meet these particular BNO requirements. It doesn't compromise the underlying platform design, and it allows the potential for networks or subzones to be merged in future so that parties can transact with parties outside of their existing zone. So that's the merging of zone concepts. So that's just a quick intro. I'll now hand over to Kat, who will take you through somewhat more detail in the solution and the core requirements.
Okay, hello everyone. So to start with, we're just going to reiterate what the current state of compatibility zone is. Effectively, it's an identity service and an identity address book. So we can guarantee global uniqueness across the network for all zone members, and we provide a service by which other members can find one another. Both controlled by a single root of trust, but chaining down to certificates. Of course, the node certificate is signed by the doorman. If we go to the next slide. However, what we are proposing is we take that concept of a compatibility zone and break it down and decompose it into a series of what we're calling subzones. So conceptually, there is no difference between a compatibility zone operating a single subzone and what we currently have. A subzone is a network map, it is a doorman, it is a common root of trust, and it's a common address book. However, what that allows for is across a single compatibility zone is multiple subzones to be run and operated by the zone operator. Next slide. So we are essentially creating two concepts. We have the idea of a public subzone, which is a subzone within a compatibility zone where all of the parameters are under the purview of the zone operator, which is basically what we have now. But we're also creating the idea of a segregated subzone where a number of those parameters are deferred to the ownership of some entity, normally a business network, to address the current problem, which is I want to run my own notaries on this system and have them totally whitelisted. Well, by deferring elements of the network properties that apply to a single network map, then you can have that. So each subzone operates its own network map, therefore it operates its own set of network parameters, but they inherit a set of common parameters and they're all signed by the same trust root. And a single doorman operates on that network, which... Next slide. It's summarized quite nicely in this diagram. So, as I said, you have two network maps operating. One represents the public-facing subzone, which is analogous to the current compatibility zone. And then you have a separate segregated subzone that has been created to serve the requirement of some business network operator. The common parameters are maintained by the compatibility zone operator, and the segregated parameters or the deferred parameters can be set via some arrangement with that business network operator. So there are a number of constraints that, sort of internal requirements that we have when signing this. Subzones must be mergeable. There should be, as discussed, the global end state ideally is one zone. We don't, everything can interact on everything can find each other on a single zone. There can't be any barrier to merging subzones to enable that in the future. One of the great hurdles of merging private zones is the different trust root. But because they share a trust root, it will be mergeable. No nodes can exist in more than one subzone. That is to preserve bidirectional identity lookup. We are not interested in creating a system whereby some nodes can see others, but others cannot see them. Again, so there's no incentive of identification. We want to maintain global uniqueness across networks so they're mergeable, hence a single doorman. For speed of delivery, we don't wish at this time to change the Corda code base. Corda node should see a subzone as it currently sees a compatibility zone. It shouldn't have to change. And notaries can only exist in a single subzone.
Can I ask questions in the middle?
Yes.
I wasn't sure if I could. Something that wasn't clear for me when I was reading the paper was that, hi, by the way, it's Fuzz. Yeah. A node that's in the segregated subzone, can it reach a node that's in the public subzone?
No.
No.
So by design,
yeah.
We are applying the constraint that, for all intents and purposes, a segregated zone is just that. It is an entirely enclosed enclave. Internally, it has complete transaction ability. Everything can see everything else, but there is no bleed across. If that was a desired state, then two zones would have to be merged, either into the public zone or forming another subzone based on the old members.
I only raise it because there seems like a contradiction to me in the requirements. So on the one hand, the requirement is a logical BNO may wish to kind of segregate certain aspects of it, so I'll say this notaries, and almost have a dark pool, if you like, of nodes. So it's a functionality requirement, if you like, it's a functional requirement. But then later on we're talking about merging together, but once you merge, then they all become public and visible. And I would argue that in some cases there are genuine cases where one wishes to have for a BNO a set of dark nodes, if you like, which will always be dark for business reasons. And then when you want to move some states, if you like, out of that region and make it available, if you like, across the kind of the global state, then there's some kind of notary transfer effectively from a dark notary to a publicly available notary.
I mean, the problem with that would be that how would any other node trust that notary change transaction without being able to verify the transaction chain? If it can't go back to the dark notary, like, that would have to be governed by the global parameters. That transaction would be signed, but if that notary does sort of not exist, how do we verify it?
Yeah, unless there's a
chain snip. And
you have to snip. Yeah. But
these are moderately internal requirements.
Okay.
So, So we've mentioned network parameters a number of times. I think it's worth just drilling into how we are talking about splitting them up. So currently there is a single network parameter file, and it governs the agreed upon state of the network. It is a list that every node joining that essentially is agreeing to trust. What we are talking about is breaking that into three discrete components. You have the epoch, which would be the global versioning. It is intentional that we are versioning network parameters across the entire zone, not across subzones. The common parameters that remain under the purview of the network operator are pretty much everything that's boring and dull and max transaction size and stuff. And then those parameters that are chosen to be deferred. At the moment, as we are presenting this design, we are intending to only defer the notary whitelists. That may or may not be a requirement, but as we are currently planning it, we are only talking of deferring. If you want the segregated subzone, then you would have to run your own notary. So
explicitly it doesn't include signature constraints, for example.
They would be global.
They would be global.
And as would Java package interfaces.
There's no parameter for signature constraints. It's only for the zone whitelist constraints.
Oh, I see, right.
Which hopefully people will migrate away from. Well, we could defer that, but
I mean,
it's better not to.
Yeah, the idea is that there is an overhead of deferring things because we're not. If the intention is such that anything deferred is not a grab bag of I want this, but you can set that. It is the zone, because otherwise you would be in a different zone at that point. The intention is that this is a global zone you are joining, but you are you can choose to have a business spreadsheet that lets you pick a very specific element of it to control, and by doing so you are saying no, we will adopt and run that. We don't want to, just from an operational perspective, it would be a massive amount of work to go, okay, so these people want this, this and this, and they want that, but we'll have you that. So we are basically breaking it into three components, which we manage separately. The epoch, which will be uniquely managed by the system, the common parameters that will be managed by some process by the zone operator, and the deferred ones. Of course, for the public zone or zones, the deferred parameters will be managed by the zone operator. And we are not going to be opinionated about how they've gathered and how it is managed.
You mean the common parameters?
Yeah, sorry, the common parameters of the zone operator. The deferred ones, we don't want to be opinionated about how the zone operator collects them from the person they are deferred to, but they will be some mechanism by which they can be communicated, and from that we will generate a file. Because currently the network parameters is a file. We're talking, what we're intending is breaking that into three discrete units that can be built on demand into a versioned file, which is where the epoch gets implemented.
Yeah.
So can we move on? Okay, so yes, so as we talked about, we have the common parameters, pretty much everything apart from notary whitelisting. it is intended that the common parameters are an error incrementing set of choices made by the zone operator. It isn't going to be a case where a segregated subzone can come along and choose an older version of the parameters. It is not, as the zone moves forward, you should be moving forward. You have a choice to stay where you are, i.e. not accept a flag day because you don't want to, that's perfectly fine. But should you ever require a flag day, you cannot elect to stay on the older version of global parameters. They are very much, as is currently, maintained by the global operator. You just get to choose when you take them. So it is not a system by which you can go back in time and pick them. You will be always moved on to whatever is appointed by the zone operator.
I'm going to ask so many stupid questions. Forgive me. So the behaviour right now with the nodes is that if there's a flag day and that is not acknowledged, that the node shuts down.
Yes.
Is that going to change then?
No. So there are no node side changes. The only difference will be when a zone applies a flag day. For example, if a segregated subzone is running with the signed file and the global properties change, they don't need to generate a new file. They could stay where they are. But my point is, if they change a deferred property, then we would need to generate a new file.
Okay.
We're not going to allow, by design, and as people free, the option to stay at the older version of global properties. Because by moving forward, you can opt to not take them, but whichever.
Perfect. That's great. I understood that. Clarified it. Yeah, brilliant.
Okay.
Yep. I think we talked about this quite a lot, but just to go through it briefly, the notary whitelist exists in the network parameters to define a set of notaries that transactions should be trusted and governed by. That is by far the most common requirement. I want to operate my own notaries. Okay, fine. But to do that, we have to essentially create a separate network map and defer those. So when we say we're deferring the whitelist, what we are effectively saying to a segregated subzone operator is, okay, fine, you can run your own notaries, generate node info files, give them, create that relationship with the zone operator, then have some mechanism by which you can give signed node info file to them, and then they can be combined with common parameters to form a set of network parameters for that net subzone. From the node's perspective, it's completely opaque. It has no idea what type of subzone it's in. All it sees is a network map with a set of network properties. Some of those are a list of notaries that it will trust. And it can find, because those notaries are also in the network map. It is an opaque change.
Okay. A transparent change.
A transparent change. Yes, it's a transparent. It's completely opaque. So we talked a lot about deferring the notary whitelist. We are not currently planning to defer any other parameter. That is a choice we are putting out there. Anyone wants to shout and scream?
So the specific example quoted is the minimum platform version. If a subzone wishes to maintain a set of versions that are restricted and potentially well out of sync with the global network for whatever reasons of interoperability with other systems in their network, if they wish to increment further, then they are faced with at the moment the need to move their version. So the only way around that would be to say we'll defer that minimum version also into that list of parameters.
Yeah.
And say at the present time that's not what we are proposing.
No, I mean the thing we're not proposing as well is to effectively defer every parameter. At that point, it's not really a subzone. It is effectively running a separate network. It is very much
with the same trust root.
With the same trust root. That might be a requirement. It is. We are sort of somewhat positing that it's not. That there are maybe one or two that really define points where business network operators wish to take ownership.
Isn't there?
But there is also.
doesn't actually prevent this, right? It's compatible
No, we're
with.
not saying it prevents it. We're saying the tooling we're intending to offer in phase 1 won't.
Okay.
Phase 1 though.
Well, phase 2 is always negotiable.
Yeah. It's just, I suppose the question to ask always is, from what I understand, is it almost equivalent to does it blend? Will it merge? So can you merge the networks together? And if the platform version is an issue, I don't see why it necessarily has to be an issue. You know, if you can sort of say, well, it can merge if you can upgrade your platform version to the public zone.
Well, I think it's more likely. Well, there are two situations. One, a subzone could lag behind because it doesn't want to move forward.
Often they would. I mean, I imagine this is one of the key requirements.
Or they leap ahead because they want to move to version 12, and for whatever reason, the public subzone is on version 8. Just because of the nature of global networks. That would prevent merging until effectively the larger network being merged into would have the controlling say about what that set of parameters would look like afterwards.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't preclude merging, but it does make it more complicated.
It just requires planning.
It requires more planning.
And with respect to the notary whitelist merging,
So
that's essentially a complicated ad hoc political discussion each time. You know, is notary probably okay? Is it probably not okay? Kind of thing.
Yeah,
I did have that as a question, but I wasn't sure if it was
we do address
for
that.
this session. But
the main document addressed the concept of where we're going with zone merging. We do talk about the internet.
Yeah.
So we go to the next slide. Again, so very briefly, this is still one compatibility zone. Everything is governed by a set of certificates. All of the zone parameters will be signed by the same certificate. We're not going to generate per subzone certificate chain of root. As per the current global parameters, they will be signed by that. It may be at some point in the future we allow for the operation of the subzone by a third party, essentially running your own network map, at which point we would generate a separate key. But we are intending to just sign all of these parameters with the same set of signed keys that we currently have.
Does that mean that the compatibility zone operator controls the dark notaries or approves the dark notaries?
No. So there's an out-of-band operation being performed by a zone operator when they set up a subzone. There will be some business relationship established and some mechanism put in place to gather the elements that are being deferred. In this case, of a notary whitelist, so you need to have some way of giving signed notary info files that would be managed by the zone operator and applied to the parameters 101. I mean, that's where the tooling that would be built to support this comes in, but which we've somewhat omitted by this because that's very much sort of an internal thing that are sort of beyond the requirements. So yeah, so effectively, the management and signing of all the subzones is still done by the zone operator, and there is some mechanism by which they gather, because we're not seeing ad hoc subzones. Like the creation of a subzone is very much something that is done for a purpose. There is a relationship established at that, and some control put into engender the gathering of those files.
So operationally, what kind of control the subzone operator actually has on the subzone?
They get to define, well, that depends. They get to define which notaries are running their subzone.
But they also control the network map.
Dynamically, at runtime.
No, they control the flag data network map. The zone operator still runs the network map server.
Yeah.
And can they update the network map at will?
Well, the network map is updated by nodes joining and leaving.
as a subzone operator, I can control the membership of the subzone.
So we are currently, that is a question for later.
Otherwise, I don't see.
No, by which I mean currently. So there is literally a slide on that later.
Of course, thank you.
Oh, anyway.
Wait for that slide. Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about this a bit. To allow for network merging, there has to be some provision by which notary transactions are trusted. So by attaching signed network parameters to a transaction, you can tell at the time that transaction was signed, which notaries were trusted to notarize the transaction. The problem becomes, as networks merge, how do I not just go back in time and take a signed note in profile back when that notary was trusted? Because if I merge into the public network, my small notary may no longer be trusted by everyone. So by ensuring across the entire zone there is a global network epoch, and by putting in the logic that actually I will only trust transaction attached node info, network parameter, if it is the current version or higher, then I will accept it. If it's an older version than is current, then my current version, I won't trust it.
You expand on that.
I have just a small question. Is your assumption that a notary will be always there in one network or other?
So the assumption is for the lifetime of a zone, a notary must always be there, or a notary transaction and change sniffing encountered. That is currently true for all compatibility zones in Corda. There's the process intended for merging networks. We can be discussed. It is talked a bit about later. It's somewhat out of the scope of this design meeting, but the idea is that when a subzone merges into another one, if it's two subzones merging, then there is a level of political negotiation, as Mike said, about who's going to trust what notary. If you're merging into the public zone, then there is a mechanism by which those notaries can join the public network as nodes and enact a notary change transaction. The point before that happens would be a flag day on the global network to bump the epoch to guarantee that those notaries wouldn't be trusted in any future transaction because the global network parameters have a higher version. Therefore, you wouldn't trust that network parameter version in a transaction.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. If we look at the next slide, we somewhat talk about this. Well, we don't talk about flag day stuff.
Go on the next one.
No, just a quick brief cover of flag day. As we said, there are two times when a subzone would have a flag day. Either an element of the deferred parameters is changed, that by default would trigger a flag day, or when the global parameters are changed, there's an optional flag day. You may wish to take it and be in sync with it, with the global network, or not. However, if you ever change the deferred parameter, you will just get the latest.
So you can delay it, but not.
You can delay it,
avoid it,
but not avoid it. Again, the intention is that it is a global zone with a number of subcomponents. It is not, and just from an operational perspective, operating a sort of a historic set of parameters you could pick from and apply would make the operation of a number, an ever-growing number of subzones very onerous. And we go next slide. So this is where we start. This is how we envisage the sort of interaction of common parameters and deferred parameters. So we have a little story about how the zone operates. So when the zone starts up, it's at epoch 1, and that is running common parameters version 1. If a subzone was subsequently set up, well, that adopts the common parameters because it has no choice. There are no historic versions, but that is now epoch 2. So as we see, epoch is always incrementing. It always goes up. So we always have a guarantee that we will not trust any set of signed network parameters signed at an earlier epoch version.
So the main, sorry, Kat. So the main network parameters could update with the epoch, but there's nothing's changed.
Yes.
Because the subzone's parameters changed. Is that correct?
Yes, but well, no, because you wouldn't re-sign the network file. Just next time you generate it.
Yeah, you just keep track of what it would be basically next time you generate it.
Yeah. So basically, next time you sign it, you would generate a new version and you get a new epoch.
I see.
So there's some central number fountain that's
Effectively, there would have to be some mechanism by which you globally count it, and then you go, I need to generate a new one because I need to sign it. So I'll just get that, and I'll plug that, and I'll plug that, and go sign that file. And that would have to be globally tracked, because it does impact the signing and the trustworthiness of that particular file. Because if you didn't have that, you could just go, well, back when this notary was trusted on this subzone, I have a file that is signed by the trust group that, if I attach it to this transaction, makes it look legitimate. But no notary should accept that if it checks the version number in the file and go, wait a minute, my note, we're currently at 10, you're 7. No. Unless it was a notary change transaction. And that's the only time we're implying that it's valid. And there is work to be put in around some kind of fudge factor in there that you can't suddenly apply it, because of course then you'd have a period where you would have outing no. And there's a lot of discussion about that internally currently, but that again, that's moderately out of scope for this. I won't go through the whole thing, but as you can see that the epoch constantly rises as the common parameter version doesn't. As networks are added, they have a choice of whether to take a flag day or not, defer it, as Mike said. But when they merge, then the first thing that happens is a flag day to guarantee that the network you're merging into has a higher version. Okay, so now we get on to some of the questions we have. So one of them is privacy and membership. So by design, it is the idea of the global Corda network is that knowledge of membership is not a privileged thing. It shouldn't be a big deal. And as a lot of the solution we're proposing here is a low impact change. It should be 0 changes in the node. However, if true privacy and membership is a requirement, that does require change in the node. It requires authentication added to the network map, so you can validate this. Answering Fuzz's question earlier, who can access your network, who can download it, and how that's managed. As a phase 1, we're not proposing it. We're effectively proposing the same solution that the private network map solution went into, which was security of security. Generating, here is your UUID, here is your endpoint to join this network map.
Well, it's technically like a global password. So the difference is you can't revoke individual leakers, but
and once it's leaked, you can't undo it.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course,
well, you can revoke everyone's password in effect. Everyone has to edit their config file to point to a new one if it happens. But the assumption is people don't.
We think for a phase 1 that's good enough. But there is a discussion to be had around whether that is true. Because one thing this doesn't prevent is privacy. It has an element of privacy, but there is always the chance that someone could guess it, it could leak. And it doesn't add control. There is no way to actively stop a node joining. Well, if there's no discussion, we can move on.
Well,
there's no way to stop the node joining the segregated zone.
No.
So if you know the UUID, you can join it.
Yeah. If that was a thing we have to change, then of course we would look at putting it in, but that's when you subvert into BNO membership control, which is possibly something that is important.
Forgive me, I'm listening and letting it sort of carry on, if you like, but there are questions stacking up. And the first one is that there are some implied requirements I think we've touched upon, but I wonder if there's a explicit list of these that are essential for checkpointing to see if the solution meets the requirements.
Effectively, they're in the document right now.
They are in the document. Mm.
Yeah, it's quite a big list of.
There are probably ones that still aren't there that should be, but
it's possible there's some missing. So we've made a number of, there are a number of internal choices that constrict some of the things, like not changing Corda right now. It should be ideally a low impact. We can deliver this without requiring no changes. It would work with version 3, it would work with version 4.
Yeah. I think that's a big constraint there. That stops a lot of other possibilities.
But then if that is, if for example this was, if 30 people stood up and went, no, we demand this, then that's a very different, other decision point. If that makes sense.
It just seems to me one of the requirements, a real functional requirement, is I want to have private notaries, but also my nodes in my subzone, if you like. can use this private notary for doing private transactions for type X, which will never leak out, no one else is going to see them. But they also want to do transactions of type Y, where type Y is, I want to pay someone with fiat, for example. And there we want to use the publicly trusted notaries, which would ensure that there aren't going to be some sort of bifurcation of assets and so on. And those two use cases, I would imagine. So I want to have a private network where I'm going to be discussing, I don't know, the agreement around arms purchases, for example, which has to be private.
Yep.
And then I also have another set of transactions which are to do with paying contractors, if you like. And I can't see why. See, if you're going to continue operating that ad infinitum, it never is going to be the case where suddenly doing those first types of transactions that are private would ever want to come out into the open.
There's another question we have up here. I think it's maybe the next slide.
Might get that.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. Come back to that one. Is an extension of this. So currently the proposal is that you cannot opt out of deferring a parameter. The intention is if you the subzone, you're accepting that you will be running your own notary, for example. So if you combine, so currently at this point you just have a sort of pseudo private zone, but we are not allowing you to use the global ones. But if you combine the two as a requirement, then yes, you would have the option of both essentially. Like I want to use the global ones plus, which is a sort of third requirement.
I think it would help perhaps to have a little table where we have combinations of things, and effectively this design allows for this.
Well, this design doesn't preclude them, but we are listing some of those features as constraints.
Right.
So there is nothing to stop us, having a delegated parameter be a union of the global notaries and that, but we are.
The global notary wouldn't be able to dial back if the node profiles are private.
That is true. Well, it would if you could join both networks. But again, that's the thing we are saying that you shouldn't be able to do, and it would be a no-side change. Conceptually, there's nothing to prevent us, but our constraint and our supposition is that's not what.
Would it be a no-side change?
You'd have to be able to join multiple networks. So you'd have to specify it as a list of compatibility zones.
Or the zone itself has a list of nodes that want to be hoisted out of the segregated zone into the public network map.
Could be. I mean, there's no way we could design it if that was a genuine requirement.
So in that sense, this solution is a bit different from the current private network map functionality,
yes,
which does allow privacy of nodes, but allows access to in theory, allows access to a global notary.
Yes.
No, because the global notary still wouldn't be able to
Still
see
can't see it.
Yeah.
I know.
I mean, I think so when it comes to like trying to keep data private from notaries, we have the non-validating notary, we have confidential identities, working on SGX, maybe in future even things like zero-knowledge proofs. There's quite a lot of machinery being deployed there to solve that problem, so I'm not sure we should be adding like a fifth potential mechanism. At least not from a privacy perspective. I mean, the network map privacy is different. I mean, that's not something any of those things we've solved. But.
That's a fair point. Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, it is a question that sort of needs asking. For example, if taking this question in isolation, there is a case to be made that I want to segregate a subzone. I'm willing to engage with the zone operator to have that relationship put in place. There is but I just want to. I don't really want to defer any parameters. I just want a private membership list, which is effectively, but as Mike points out, then it adds complexity into identification. And see, we have bidirectionality of identity lookup. The other option, if we go back to the previous slide we skipped over. So the third question is essentially one of membership uniqueness. We have no way of enforcing that at the moment because whilst the intention is a node joins a single network map, there is nothing to stop it joining multiple ones, but it's always changing its config file and restarting.
But we would see that on the server side.
You would, but there's the argument that you could say, well, I'm just changing zone, I'm literally moving zone.
Why can't we just enforce in our database logic that joining one deletes you from the other?
Oh, we could do that.
So
but I mean, so the question is how much we want to put in to prevent that, whether people...
Well, I would argue we shouldn't put anything in there. On behalf of my customers, I'd suggest that actually it is a required feature that the client would want to be member of several subzones sometimes.
No, you can't be a member of several subzones. That's already ruled out as a possibility.
So at the moment you can switch. So we can go to one, next day to another one, and go back. And
there's nothing to prevent that, because of the way the network...
Well, the node might crash if you do that. Because at that point you're violating the assumption that that network parameters evolve in certain ways, right? Like you might have a notary whitelist that has items removed.
It would be very good.
Added.
Yeah.
Or indeed you might have an epoch number of the parameters that goes backwards if there have been deferred updates in one and not the other. So I think it's fair to say that you should never be able to move.
It's one of the questions about whether we explicitly put protection around it, or whether we just don't count it as a problem because it's an operation.
You mean if someone edits their config files to try to move to a different subzone, we should reject it, basically?
Effectively.
So can I just come back to it a little bit? So it's ruled out for technical reasons, right? There are not business reasons that would prevent us from...
I mean, they're one and the same with this kind of thing, right? I mean, if you want to be doing multiple business networks, then there's a mechanism for that, which is the global zone.
Yeah. And,
they want to be private, though, at the same time. They want to be...
I mean, at some point it stops being meaningful. Your node can be discovered by an IP address scan anyway. You can't hide the fact you're running Corda. It's one of those things where eventually it's just not worth keeping that private.
But I can have multiple nodes subscribing to multiple zones.
You can't have multiple. That would be knocked out by the doorman, right? Because you would be trying to register multiple nodes with the same identity.
Exactly.
So, you'd have sub identities and you basically...
Well, you could, for example, you could register your identity with the doorman and go, great, I'm going to join the public zone, but if I wanted to have a segregated zone because I want to run some tests, then I can run two completely distinct nodes with the same identity.
Well, I thought it's got a single trust group, so you can't test identities in a separate...
No, it would be the same identity, literally copy the identity.
Well, with different data and stuff.
Yeah, and just agree.
Well, we set up a UAT environment and a test net, so there shouldn't be a need for more test networks, I would hope. We already have two.
I mean, yes, the implication and thrust of this is to allow people who want to operate a notary service to be able to do so with a path to joining the global network at some point.
Yeah. I mean, the simplest thing is to have a global notary as well. But ideally, at some point, this feature falls out of use because it's not solving any real problem beyond the lack of a global, very private notary. Right? Yeah. So it's a timing issue with roadmap and stuff.
I think we've done this one.
We have done one. We did talk about this earlier, so this is just rehashing what we talked about in terms of how you merge zones and what merging zones looks like. I don't really need to go over it again.
Other than that it is a destructive option. That's the key thing. You decide to merge your zone, you effectively are going to shut down one zone.
Does it involve people editing config files, or can we just reroute requests to the old files?
We can do either. They can change. So there is a number of steps we're planning. So and there is work in the notary team to do this. So the idea would be that it is agreed that two zones will merge, and the simplest case is a segregated zone moving into a public one. At which point the entire segregated zone shuts down. There is a period of time over it shuts down. Change all of their configs to point at the public zone, so that's just changing the capacity zone URL. All of the nodes join the public zone. Sorry, before that happens, the public zone has a flag date to bump its epoch to make sure that's the current version. All of the historic nodes join the public zone, so including the notaries. They won't be whitelisted because the assumption would be that the public won't decide to trust how they were operated. It might, but it's unlikely at that point you're doing. At that point, you can run notary change, and there will be a period of time where notary change transaction could be enacted in all of the states, move them from those private notaries to the public ones, and they would be that transaction would be trusted because that's the only one we're allowing with an old Epoch.
So we're allowing a notary change from a non-whitelisted notary.
Yes.
But people will still resolve through that.
That's the intention.
But then if they're not trusted, how do you know there's no double spends on the other side of the notary change?
You still have to assume that there is some level of rigor applied to them.
Well, then why not just whitelist? So Kat is shrugging to the video. I don't know if that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's sort of.
So there's an ongoing conversation between Rick, Andreas, myself, and Richard about whether what you trust and what the time window might be on how long you.
Well, I mean, I think there's no possible way to do this that's sort of logically consistent. Doesn't involve just whitelisting. You could say, okay, you're not allowed to notarize more from now on.
Yeah,
but then if they were okay in the past, saying they're not okay in future is kind of.
Yeah, so the intention would be that they are no longer if they're no longer whitelisted and they're on a signed new transaction.
Yeah, right. But then at that point, if they were whitelistable in the beginning, then there was no need for subzones in the first place.
So I think the implication is that the original notary, the subzone that's running the notaries, may have a very clearly defined subset of the overall requirement for the broader public network. So it's just trading between those nodes, so that the trust is sufficient for that notary between themselves. But at the point at which you move to the main network, if there's stuff that you need to get trusted by other people.
Do we have a concrete example of how that has happened?
No, we don't know.
Does this feature solve
It effectively it is the path to merging two zones.
Right, but my point is that the reason there's no support for that in the current design is there are no situations in which you have two zones that can ever merge, basically. I mean, we're saying, well, you do it with like notaries that sort of were whitelisted and then are kind of whitelisted for a while and then are not whitelisted anymore. But then,
well, they were trusted
what trust arrangement?
They were trusted for the purpose for which they were used.
My question is, what is the use case of merging, actually? Do we need merging?
So the use case, the intention is, I guess the conceit is that membership of one global network in the long run is better than segregated islands. That is the central conceit here.
Otherwise, apps can't interoperate.
Yeah.
So imagine there's cash on the global zone, and then someone wants to add support for cash payments on Ledger to their app. They can code that, but it won't work if their node can't reach the cash issuers, for example, or the cash issuers can't reach them. So they need to be a part of the same zone, and if they weren't from the start, because of whatever, then they're stuck. They can never do that. They can't make that upgrade.
However, at the moment, people there are delivery roadmap problems whereby people want to go down a faster route or a different route. Where in the short term, having a subzone and having your members be on segregated zone makes sense from a delivery. But so the ability to merge at a future point where that infrastructure and like the emergent properties of a global network give more benefits, that's the benefit at point you may look to merge.
How about a slight tweak to this? Such that merging a subzone up into the global zone doesn't whitelist the notary. A notary is persona non grata. Any attempt to use states from the old zone with nodes in the new zone will crash the flow, basically. It'll just die. But they can still refer back to that old data. Those nodes can keep that old data in their vault.
Can there be some sort of specialized notary transfer
Well, that's what Kat was suggesting, but it
Yeah.
makes no sense because the
Yeah.
whole point is those other nodes don't trust that notary and probably never will. So why would they accept such a transfer?
You would need a SNP almost to. And
Well, yeah, so you
Yeah.
reissue, but
so
and then
it's
on
quite
the
expensive
notary.
operation as well.
Well, and it may not even logically make sense if the app insists on
It's
that.
kind of a political decision as well. You have to look at how the old other notaries were operated and why you would trust them up to that point, but no longer trust them. It's almost the two zones being merged, because we are talking about merging the subzone into the public zone. There's nothing to stop two subzones merging with one another, or one merging into another, who may agree that, yeah, okay, fine, we trust that you didn't have any double spend, and you want to move going forward, but you don't want to trust these notaries, so we'll have these, or we want to whitelist all of the notaries. So that's another way to make the network, is just to merge on the network, but to record under, still record under which set of network parameters a transaction was governed, so you can say that, oh no, you're not trying to lie about what was whitelisted at the time.
And I think there's no problem with trust between two subzones, a matter of control at the moment, and not be ready to join public zone. So actually, people might trust each other, that over time they understand that public zone is better, and they can join, and other politically might decide, yeah, it's fine to whitelist. This is not that we don't trust each other, it's just we are not ready to build something together. And we want to build on Corda right now, and we want to be merged in the future.
You can add them to the whitelist if the conclusion was we would always have done that if they turned up.
Yeah. And that's always a discussion with the zone operator.
But then you don't need any kind of staggered sort of.
No, it's a thing we've looked at internally. I think Andreas and Rick and.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the way to go. If they've always met those standards, then they get whitelisted, and if they haven't, then they can't be. Well, I mean, they could be merged by having incompatibilities within a compatibility zone, but not having them as sort of the pointer zones to begin with. So that's a fairly major sacrifice.
Yeah.
Then you're going to have stuff just fail, or people have to be very careful how they use data and layouts and stuff.
Okay, just a quick one. We're getting close to end of call, and a number of people have already had to drop out, I think. Obviously, this is provoking quite a lot of thought. What I would suggest, rather than continuing now, if people can give this thought and then respond back on the Corda tap mailing list. So this is not currently out to the entire open source community. This is just in the advisory level discussion, and then we may well then promote that up to Corda Dev, but Corda TAC as the advisory council plus the members of the dev team.
Okay.
And then Kat can respond back to those. So if you email Kat directly on that list, then that would work.
So I have one thing, Mark, just from an Insure Wave and our perspective is that we are live and all these changes may come next year. I'm assuming that these are all going to be backward compatible, right? So that we can plan our own pipeline. Yeah? Yeah?
Yes, the intention is that from the node side of things, this is a zero impact change.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is more around operational. How do we manage this?
Yeah, this is an operational side change. I mean, there would be changes required. If somebody opted to take and operate a segregated subzone, they would have to be their own operational side of how do we run a notary, how do we get the set aside node infos to the zone operator. But those are out-of-band questions. The operation of the node and the deployment of Corda and the operation of the system is exactly the same as it is today.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for this.
Yes, I know it's in the call, but I would suggest that we think about again this matrix that James was referring to. We basically look at sort of the subset that this is supporting, and consider the volume of use cases or customers or clients out there that particular solution aims to fulfill. Because if that's a very small set, then it may be quite an expensive change to consider. And there may be other burning issues which maybe actually we're missing out on. So my concern here is that I'm seeing numerous groups who are starting up their own networks, and they would have done so whether somebody had created a free version of this, to do so, but they were actually writing their own, and they can't. They're islands, as Mike said. They can't join together at the moment, but they are islands. I wonder if there's. I mean, really, I feel like there's a conversation to be had maybe later on, Mike, or maybe on the TAC, about some of the assumptions and the constraints that we've agreed to. I know that we've gone through those before in various lists and so on, but all the time I'm thinking there must be. Isn't there any given some of those requirements, and that allows for these islands to form, and then gradually the water level kind of goes down, they join together as land masses. And part of that comes from the trust store, the root trust store, the notion of one PKIX route, if you like, and whether that's a design decision that has to be, So I think the biggest burning questions, use cases, are going to be these masses of groups of people who are starting up their own networks. And then what are we going to do about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we spend enormous amounts of time and effort on this, frankly, and on trying to how we merge zones, all this stuff, and maybe those people just sit in islands forever. There's a limit to how far we can go with that, and I think James is going to launch a network soon, something like that. So hopefully that's a temporary phase where people are doing this, and then we can go back and reinvestigate all that stuff and look at all the changes that need to be made. So there's also
there is a question to James as the proposed operator of the R3 network, how he would foresee using this.
Well,
behold the spot.
So how would the foundation use this? The answer is software capabilities made available. We describe the capability and the constraints that it comes with to potential users of Corda network, and I guess it's a very simple conversation: is this of interest? Is this of value to you? What I would like to do, to Fuz's point, is get as much feedback as possible. Designs are always improved with customer feedback, and validate that. For example, I had a conversation yesterday where the people I was talking to were saying, I think that sounds really useful. The particular concern was around private notaries. So this, goes some way at least to solving that, and makes it an attractive thing.
Is that private notaries or exclusive notaries?
Well, actually, it's exclusive notaries.
Exclusive.
Yes, you're right. There is that difference. And
which can be implemented today already without this issue.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we need to take the conversation. Take the conversation to potentially use this, and make sure we get as much validation as we can. And I guess, Andre, that's where, in a sense, product team come in, being that bridge with customers.
Ultimately, so Nick did a lot of that, and this was seen as first. I had been informed a number of people did once. It was a requirement of them that they be able to run exclusive notaries or private notaries.
It matters. It's important, right?
It matters. They want to operate their unwhitelisted notaries. It's a thing that which is addressable, and it's how you put a proposition, how you sell it, how.
Well, that's a first type of private-ness.
That's right, yeah. Because I think if you kind of dig into those requirements, that you'll find, if you explain the constraints here, the aspects around, what can you do within a segregated zone, what can't you do in a segregated zone, that set of people who are interested, I'm not convinced that they're going to be the same size. I think they might drop quite a bit.
I suspect some of that is being driven by lack of clarity around what the minimum requirements would be for being whitelisted. Right, when I would say, yes, you've got to pass through some process to become a notary if you want to join the main zone and run your own notary, but we won't tell you what it is. Because it's not entirely clear what it should be, right? Or like, and it may go up over time.
I think that's the use in the short term what makes it useful. Is
you
can go and segregate zone. When we've established that and you can prove that you're at that, we can merge. And then that is just a no impact change on the nodes.
So can I just interrupt you, Kat? So one of the drivers for this requirement of being able or having a private notary is not just the privacy; it's also kind of operational independence of these little sub-networks, where you kind of people envision this scenario where their little sub-network gets cut off of the rest of the network of the internet, but they still should be able to do business within themselves. And I just want to check that everything you said today kind of addresses that. So they network map the levels of kind of continuous contact between the subnetwork and the bigger network, the domain, and the rest of the system. It's not like seconds or minutes. There can be substantially long outages, and the little subnetwork will still operate. Is that correct?
Yes, because I mean that's the current zone of the network map.
It's all cached.
Yeah, it's all cached locally. You just download the diff.
But I think I saw someone mention the other day that the cache was only set to 10 minutes or something like that. We need to look into that and make sure people are
that's on test net.
Oh, that's a test net.
Just because
they
didn't want to get to the situation where you would register a node and go, but I can't see this on the
right, fair enough. It's just test net.
It's just test
So
net.
it's like a revocation check or anything like that. But that has to be performed every time a node connects, and if it can't...
That's a different question.
That's a different part.
That's a different feature.
By the way, as an aside, there's a scaling issue with the protocol that people have been talking about at the moment, which is...
Which protocol?
With the network map protocol. It's probably not worth discussing right now. It's just as the number of nodes grows, the time it takes for a new joiner to bootstrap just grows as well.
I mean, I think
it's probably an optimization.
The right way to make that argument is with like a spreadsheet or just some numbers that like show at what point it becomes intolerable. You say, if it takes more than an hour to download the initial network map, then that's intolerable. You have to justify that, and then you say, okay, where's the scaling limit reached? Because I routinely watch, movies that are like 10 gigs in size on my laptop and think nothing of it, right? And that's a lot of node infos. So, and that's today.
Well, they're usually on one HTTP connection and not a connection per request per.
Well, but even with
hash.
1.1, you've got pipelining, and HTTP 2 is fully pipelined. And, you just start sending all the things you're missing, like as full blast, and the server starts replying with one after the other, right? There's no blocking, waiting for a round trip with HTTP 2. So I'm not too worried about that. It's really a data size issue. And, at some point, I guess we'll support things that aren't in the network map. Partly for not so much scaling, but more devices that are permanently behind NAT and stuff like that. Smartphones and things. We've talked a bit about how to do that, but it's not really a priority today.
I mean, while we're building this solution, there is a number of the choices to make quickly, because we can accommodate them in design quite simply as you build it. Privacy and membership being one. So, quicker decisions are better.
Yeah.
So to that end, guys, we're about 15 minutes over. Very useful. Again, if anybody has comments to make, if they can get them in as fast as possible, because we're trying to get to the point if we're going to decide to do this